The final year of the Great War is coming to a conclusion. The Russians are preparing to leave the war as they fall to the Bolshevik Revolution. However, the Americans have taken over for the Russian Bear and send 10,000 men a day to Europe to reinforce the war-exhausted British and French, while the Entente are still shaken and the war is up for grabs. The Germans now have one last chance for victory before the Western Front is overwhelmed by American forces, so they plan one last all-out assault to break the Entente as the Central Powers begin to waver and fall around them.
Freedom!
If this is the first video of mine you're watching and you want to get caught up, click on the playlist on the top of the screen and let's now get into the year 1918. On January 8th, 1918, Woodrow Wilson's 14-point speech was given to Congress. Wilson was looking to establish American war goals within the Great War. Some of his most notable points are those of supporting self-determination, free markets, open trade, and bringing the world together under a general association of nations that will later birth the League of Nations that America ironically does not join. Wilson's 14 points were looked on poorly by American allies, thinking that his idealism was not obtainable, but it was something that could be used as a possible blueprint for future peace deals after the war's end. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk had begun in late 1917 after the Russian Revolution had started, causing an armistice between Russia and the Central Powers. However, after talks had deteriorated and the Central Powers grew tired of the Russians stalling the treaty, the Germans began to walk into the Russian lands unopposed, forcing Leon Trotsky to sign an even less favorable treaty on the 3rd of March 1918, finally withdrawing the Russians from the Great War. The Russians would lose control over all of Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and regions in the Caucasus. The Russian population would shrink by 35% and its industry would be cut in half. The new Bolshevik government would have to recognize the independence of Finland and pay Germany 6 billion marks. However, the treaty would become void by the end of the war when Germany would have to sign the armistice with the Entente. In spring of 1918, Germany's first phase of a 5-phase attack would begin on the war-torn countryside of the Somme in France, mainly supported by German troops who left the Eastern Front after the Russians have left the war. These troops were retrained into German stormtroopers, who were trained to exploit gaps in the Entente lines and flood through them, often disrupting communication, attacking headquarters, and artillery crews in the back lines. They were to cause enough chaos that the Entente would either have to give up the trench or risk encirclement. During Operation Michael, the Germans looked to strike hard and fast at the Entente using these newly trained stormtroopers. The Germans looked to split British and French troops from one another, to make it easier to target one's army and attempt to knock them out of the war. Beginning on the 21st of March, Germany had amassed 74 divisions who rose over the trenches and charged at the Entente lines, taking large amounts of ground from the war-exhausted Entente, who would be pushed back miles. By March 24th, the Germans had crossed the river the Somme and had continued to steamroll past Entente forces, taking key cities and supply points. But on the 4th of April, a great push towards the city of Amiens would begin. Seizing the city would take a key supply and rail station from the Entente. If capture was possible, the Germans would weaken the Entente and possibly push further into France. However, with 2 weeks of constant fighting, the Germans were exhausted and overstretched, and way past their artillery range. And on the 5th of May, just outside of Amiens, German forces were halted and the offensive was called off and the troops were allowed to rest, causing trench warfare to begin back on the Western Front. By the end of the 2-week assault on the 5th of April, the Germans had captured 75,000 POWs and had caused 245,000 casualties to the Entente. However, the Germans suffered around 240,000 casualties, and with the Americans trickling into Europe, these were casualties that the Germans could not sustain. But the Germans still captured 1,200 square miles. The first phase of a 5-phase offensive had proven successful on the map, but on the ground it could barely be called a victory. The Germans had failed to split the French and British armies and failed to grab all key positions. And the Germans had done little but capture war-torn countrysides of France and had done nothing but put themselves in a very indefensible area on the front. For Germany's second of 5 waves of assaults in spring of 1918, they were looking to take the key rail city of Hazebrouck and split the French port cities of Dunkirk and Calais, and surround what was left of the British and Belgian forces. After a 2-day artillery bombardment from the 7th to 9th of April, the German offensive had begun at the Battle of Estras. The assault was an immediate success, cracking into the unaware Portuguese and forcing a 5-mile breakthrough past Entente trenches. For the next 2 weeks, the Germans would continue to surge forward, taking more and more cities and land from the Entente. However, Entente forces would begin to slowly reinforce and outpace German troop movements. And by the 29th of April, Operation Georgette had been called off. The Germans had seized 15 kilometers or 9 miles of the front and had caused 120,000 casualties to the Entente while suffering 90,000. However, much like Operation Michael, Germany's second wave of assaults in the spring had failed to seize any of their objectives. and had once again gained little more than shell-ridden countryside, as German forces continued to dwindle as the Entente continued to be reinforced by the never-ending flow of American troops. During the air war over the trenches, the Red Baron had been shot down and killed behind enemy lines on the 21st of April 1918, and was given a full honors funeral by the Entente. By 1918, he had 77 confirmed kills, with some sources stating that he had 100 or more. However, 77 is the final confirmed count compared to records the Entente and German air casualties had during the war. He alone in April of 1917 had shot down 21 planes, making him the highest scoring ace of all of World War I. The Americans' first real test in the Great War came on May 28, 1918, at the Battle of Cantigny. America would have to prove to the European powers that though their forces are green, they can still stand toe-to-toe with the great European armies, and be able to contribute victory to the Entente. If the Americans could not prove themselves as the Germans continued to break deeper into France, the Entente would have to reach out to Germany for an armistice in favor of the Germans. The American assault backed with French support began on the 28th of May 1918, where a rolling barrage of French artillery shielded the Americans. The German forces were quickly overwhelmed and retreated or captured. The Americans had captured the town within 30 minutes. However, the battle was not over. The Germans would continue to attempt to retake the city 3 times. All 3 times the Germans had failed and were bounced off the Americans. By the end of the battle, American forces had suffered 1,600 casualties and 318 killed, while causing 1,400 casualties to the Germans and capturing 250. With an American victory, Entente morale would begin to rise, and confidence in the Americans would begin to shift the war in favor of the Entente. By the end of May, there are now more than 1 million Americans and 10,000 arriving each day. They are far outpacing the casualties taken by the Entente and refilling the ranks, as the German army continues to weaken. For Germany's third of their 5-wave offensives in spring of 1918, the Germans would attempt to take the French region of Aisne and threaten Paris. But this was a distraction. The main goal was to draw British troops from northwestern France and Belgium to protect Paris, then re-engage northwestern France to accomplish their main goals of Operation Georgette, and splitting the British and French armies and seizing supply cities. The Third Battle of Aisne began on the 27th of May, when nearly 4,000 German artillery pieces would pour hell upon the front, mostly focused on a British-held ridge. The British troops would take heavy casualties during the bombardment, and the general in charge would continue to send more and more men into slaughter, refusing to give up the ridge. And when the German assault finally came, what was left of the British forces were shattered in retreat or captured by German stormtroopers. By the 30th of May, 3 days into the operation, German forces had captured 50,000 Entente troops. With the lack of Entente troops, the Germans would cause a 40-kilometer or 25-mile breakthrough into France, causing the entire plan to shift from only capturing the Aisne region to steamrolling towards Paris. However, the Germans were not prepared for such an offensive in the region, but still continued to push, till on the 6th of June being stalled by American forces along with French counterattacks, which would finally stop the German advance. The Germans were stopped just 65 kilometers or 40 miles outside of Paris, suffering 130,000 casualties while causing 127,000 to the Entente. This would prove to be one of the most successful accidental offensives of 1918. The Germans' fourth wave during their spring offensive began in early June of 1918. The Germans looked to secure their conquered lands from the French in their earlier operations in the spring, and they looked to strike further into France and cause another breakthrough and, if possible, seize Paris, which at the time was already preparing for evacuation and replaced by a military government. Ooh, a baguette. The German assault began on the 9th of June with an artillery bombardment over a 23-mile front, with 21 German divisions pushing forward, meeting fierce French and American resistance, as the Germans slowly crept forward into the French countryside. On the 11th of June, France struck out at the Germans in a counterattack, which had taken the Germans by surprise, and the German advance was called off. The German assault failed for many reasons, like exhaustion, outstretched supply lines, and outpacing the artillery again. However, even before the Germans could attack the French knew that the Germans were coming and beefed up their defenses. But even then, the Germans had still cracked past them, and the Germans had gained more than 9 miles in their advance. By the end of the fighting on the 11th of June, there were nearly 35,000 Entente casualties compared to 30,000 German casualties. However, the German war machine was starting to stall, and it was already overcommitted to its assaults in the west. Germany's fifth and final wave in the spring offensive would begin on July 15, 1918. Their objective was to once again break deeper into France, hoping to cause another rout and threaten the French heartlands. The assault at first would fare well for the Germans, but with the French defense and depth tactics, the Germans would eventually be held after only 2 days of their offensive. The Entente would take initiative over the Germans and launch a massive counterattack. At the Battle of Soissons on the 18th of July, the Entente would shatter the weakened Germans and send them reeling in retreat, giving up key defenses and land gain in their earlier offensives in spring of 1918. The Entente would only suffer 130,000 casualties compared to the German 168,000. 30,000 of which were captured in their haste to retreat. The German war machine had reached its breaking point. 5 months of constant offensives had exhausted them, and with American aid in the west, victory was on the horizon for the Entente. Something I've been ignoring up to this point is the Spanish flu, which was running rampant in Germany at this time, which was also affecting the German offensives. However, as a community, we have voted that this will be in a future video covered in more detail. So if you guys are new to the channel and want to join the community to see more like the Spanish flu and other future videos listed on screen, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Now back to the video. After the defeat of the Germans at the Battle of Soissons, the Entente would now send a never-ending assault towards the German lines. The next few months of Entente attacks would be known as the 100-Day Offensive, which had begun on August 8th at the Battle of Amiens, which would be quoted as the Black Day of the German army. The Entente would target weak and poorly entrenched Germans who shattered when met with Entente forces. Aw, come on, I just wanted to play. By the end of the first day, the Entente had cracked a 15-mile wide breakthrough of the German lines and caused 40,000 casualties, 17,000 of which were now POWs. The Entente would only suffer 6,500 casualties in their assault. This would cause the Germans to begin to pull out of the salient that they had made earlier in March. At the Battle of Dobro Pole during the Vardar offensive on the 15th of September 1918, Bulgarian troops would put up their last and final defense against the Entente forces in Greece, as Greek, Serbian, and British forces had begun an assault on the joint Bulgarian and German positions, quickly overwhelming them and sending them into retreat. The Bulgarian army was exhausted, and its people had grown tired of the war. From this point on, along with other losses in the offensive, the Bulgarian army began to desert. Some of these deserters would take up arms in the Radomir Rebellion. These rebels would grow in strength and begin to march towards Sofia and would declare a Bulgarian Republic and revolution. And on the 29th of September, the Bulgarians asked for an armistice with the Entente at the Greek city of Salonika, giving its name the Armistice of Salonika. The rebellion was squashed, but the Bulgarian war sport was completely gone, and they continued to stay out of the war. And on the 2nd of October, the Bulgarian Tsar abdicated the throne and went into exile. With the Bulgarian withdrawal from the Great War on the 29th of September, and the Ottoman capital of Constantinople left undefended, along with being pushed back in Syria by the English and Arab forces, mixed with the never-ending failures of Mesopotamia, the sick man of Europe would ask for an armistice with the Entente, signing the Armistice of Mudros on the 30th of October. The Ottomans would have to abandon the forts within the straits and demobilize their army, and allow Entente forces to take full control of the forts and occupation of Constantinople, along with areas in Anatolia, and a complete withdrawal from neutral Persia and Ottoman conquered territories in the Caucasus by the Brest-Litovsk Treaty signed earlier in 1918. Beginning on the 24th of October 1918, the Entente would send an all-out assault towards the Austria-Hungarian lines in Italy, instantly shattering the exhausted men from all parts of the empire. Within a week and a half, the Entente forces had broken through and into Austria proper, and had caused a complete rout, along with killing 30,000 Austro-Hungarians as well as capturing 350,000. 120,000 Germans, 83,000 Czechs and Slovaks, 60,000 Southern Slavs, and 40,000 Poles, alongside 20,000 Romanians and 7,000 Austro-Hungarian loyal Italians, with the Entente only suffering 40,000 casualties. The Austrian army in the Italian front was little more than a paper tiger. The forces that were left put up no resistance and either allowed themselves to be captured or deserted, after the Hungarians had declared themselves independent and established a Hungarian Republic, attempting to separate themselves from the Central Powers, causing the Poles and Czechs to soon follow and do the same. Southern Slavs would also declare their independence and look to establish Yugoslavia, which would be the united ethnic state of Southern Slavs. With no real army left, the Austrians looked for an armistice with the Entente, and the Armistice of Vilgusti was signed on the 3rd of November and would go into effect on the 4th a day later. The Austrians would retreat from many Italian lands and lands claimed by Italy, as well as all German troops within Austria-Hungary had to evacuate within 15 days or face punishment. And the Austrian army was to lay down arms and allow Entente forces to travel through Austrian Alps and attack Germany from the south. The Battle of Vittorio Veneto was the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. With one last all-out assault on Austro-Hungarian forces in Italy, it would cause the downfall of a 650-year dynasty. Hungary would soon follow the Austrians and sign the Armistice of Belgrade on the 13th of November 1918. On the 21st of August, another offensive began at the Second Battle of the Somme. The assault was an instant success, pushing the Germans back 34 miles. And with another assault by the Entente around the river of the Somme, the Germans were forced to retreat even further back, giving away more and more land conquered in the spring offensive. By the 2nd of September, Canadian troops would begin to reach the westernmost portion of the Hindenburg Line. With other advances in the front, the German army would attempt to fully withdraw to the Hindenburg Line, By the 5th of October, Entente forces had broken past the line, and Germany's last defenses had been shattered, and all hope for a German victory had died with it. By the end of the 100-day offensive on the 11th of November, Germany's army was basically non-existent. The Germans had suffered over 1 million casualties, 100,000 killed, 685,000 wounded, and 386,000 captured, with an unknown amount of desertions. Germany would attempt to reach out to President Wilson on the 5th of October 1918, looking to establish an armistice based off his 14-point declaration earlier that year. However, the Entente would not negotiate with Germany because Germany was not willing to have the Kaiser abdicate the throne and believed that their situation was not dire enough for such a demand in negotiations. So no armistice was signed in October and the war raged on. But by late October and early November, it was clear to all but a few that the Great War was over. And with news of the Austria-Hungarian, Bulgarian, and Ottoman ceasefires with the Entente, the German people wanted out of the war. However, by the 3rd of November, German warships were ordered by those who still thought the war was still possible to win, or those looking to make sure that the German fleet wouldn't fall into Entente hands, ordering the German Navy to leave port and go on a death mission towards the British Navy. But the sailors had refused in what's known as the Kiel Mutiny, and unknowingly started the German Revolution, which would quickly spread from Kiel to Berlin and all across Germany. Hundreds of thousands of Germans would take to the streets to protest the war, and with the Kingdom of Bavaria overthrowing its king and declaring the People's State of Bavaria, under much pressure from the German people and his advisors, on the 9th of November, the German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II had abdicated the German throne, along with his son giving up claims on the German throne and Prussia. And by the end of November, all 22 German kings had abdicated their thrones across Germany, looking to distance themselves from the German Revolution and attempt to allow a transition of power without bloodshed. On the 11th of November, with Germany no longer having an emperor in charge, the Entente were willing to negotiate with the Germans. And at 11 a.m. on the Western Front, all guns had fallen silent. The last believed death of the war was Henry Nicholas John Gunther, an American who was shot and killed at 10:59 a.m. World War I raged for 4 years, 3 months, and 14 days, and consisted of 30 nations. From those nations, the nearly global count of civilian and military deaths is around 15 to 22 million. The Entente would see 9.2 to 10 million dead, and the Central Powers would see 7 to 8.3 million dead. An estimated 8 to 11 million military deaths are linked to the Great War. The First World War would see the use of machine guns, the introduction of airplanes, tanks, and poison gases. The use of poison gas would be banned globally in future conflicts due to its horrific ability to kill, and tanks and the airplane would change wars to come. Serbia's population was hit the hardest during the First World War, with an estimated 1.25 million deaths, and nearly 25% of their population being wiped out during the war. An estimated 5 to 8 million civilians died within the war. However, many civilian deaths came from famine and disease, which was running rampant across all countries. In Germany alone, an estimated 600,000 civilians were killed by starvation due to disease and famine, mostly caused by the debatedly illegal blockade of German trade lanes by the British. The country hit the hardest by famine disease was the neutral country of Persia, who had been invaded and occupied by British, Russian, and Ottoman troops during the Great War. Persia would have an estimated death toll of 2 million due to starvation and the Spanish flu that would strike hard at the starved people. Some sources put their death toll at 8 to 10 million people, which would be nearly half of the Persian population at the time, which would raise the Great War death tolls to 23 to 32 million. Other more horrific losses of life would be the targeting of ethnic peoples under occupation or believed to be against the war effort, like that of the German rape of Belgium, which would see 23,000 Belgians killed and another 120,000 forced into German labor camps. Or the Ottoman targeted genocides of ethnic Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, and Yazidis, all of which happened within the Ottoman Empire from 1913 to 1923, had either been killed or forced to migrate into the deserts or out of Ottoman territory completely. All deaths have been denied by the Ottoman government and are still denied by Turkey today. Within a 4-year span, nearly 2 to 3% of the human population had died due to the Great War, mixing into 3 to 5% of the population dying to the Spanish flu. Nearly 5 to 7% of the world's population had died during the span of the Great War. Thanks everyone for watching. The next video will cover the treaties of World War I, so if it is already posted, go watch it. See how Europe is cut up between the victors, and see how each nation reacts to the consequences of the First World War. And if you haven't subbed already, why not? You've made it this far. Till then, bye.